Hello and welcome to my talk on Skomer 2023. My name is Leighton and I'm the warden out on Skomer Island. So this talk is going to have photos from myself, Keris Aston, who's the assistant warden, and Mike and Ted Wallen as well. Now, it was a beautiful year out on Skomer, and I'm sure what most of you imagine when you think of Skomer, you think of this a beautiful scene like this, for example. So you've got Thrift and Sea Campion, and you're looking along the South Pembrokeshire coast, and the sea's nice and flat, and it's just a beautiful day. But of course, that's not what we see when we first move out onto Skomer. You know, we're going to be moving out onto Skomer in 2 or 3 weeks' time, something along those lines, and we won't be seeing this. We will be seeing a scene a bit similar to this. So this is Skomer in March. It is brown, the bracken is dead, and to a lot of people it looks quite bleak, but to me it's really beautiful. The way the light bounces off the bracken at this time of the year is really fantastic, and you start to see the signs of spring coming through as well. So you can start to see grass coming through the soil, and also if you look closely you might see some gulls flying around as well. So these are birds that have returned from their wintering grounds, and they're setting up their breeding territories within their colonies as well. So it's a really fantastic time of the year for me. It's also a bit of a privilege for me because we spend the sort of 2 or 3 weeks in March, just the 3 or 4 of us on the island, and that's a real privilege. You don't get that at any other time of the year, really. So what do we do in March? So we spend the most of the month cleaning and cleaning. So we're getting the island ready for the visitors. So that is a lot of cleaning the accommodation for the researchers, for the visitors, for the volunteers as well. We also do a lot of repair work as well. So repair of the paths, and repairing any benches and things like that, and also repairing the buildings. So they will have sustained some sort of damage over the winter. It's very rare that you come back and there's no damage whatsoever. So we'll be doing some of that as well. And in fact, in this photo, if I can get this laser pointer to work here, you can see a dark patch on the roof. Yeah. That's actually a repair that we'd done shortly before taking this photo. So we came back in the spring of 2023 to find there's a hole in the roof, some sheets are missing, and so that was obviously priority 1, is to get the roof repaired and to get the building watertight again. So yeah, I look forward to moving out this year, seeing what damage is on the building, and repairing that as quickly as possible. But that's basically what we do in March. We don't see many other people at all until the arrival of the work party or the delivery barge, whichever is earlier. And the barge looks a bit like this, really. So it's a chance for us to get all of our materials for the year onto Skomer. So that is, for example, here you can see some new mattresses for the hostel. They're also balanced on top of the garage doors as well. So we've got some new garage doors coming on in this picture. You can also see some corners of gas bottles as well. So they're coming on the barge. We have fuel coming on. And then any materials we need for building work that's happening on the island. So that's mainly done by the work party. We'll show you some slides of that in a minute. It's also a chance for us to get rid of any rubbish that we've accumulated through the autumn once the island closes. So this is a load of cable just going off here in the spring as well. So it's a great chance to fill our stores, but then get rid of a load of rubbish as well. So I mentioned the work party. So they're really, really pivotal and important to the island, really. We couldn't function without our volunteers, and also the work party helping to keep the island running and maintain all the buildings as well. So this spring we were tackling some of the cladding down at North Haven. So the old cladding has got woodworm and starting to rot as well. So we've started removing that and replacing it with new cladding, as you can see here. I'm glad to say that actually it doesn't stay this colour. The sun does bleach it, and it goes a bit more of like a silvery colour. Especially when it's dry, it looks very similar to the old oak cladding that we had as well. So glad to say I don't live in a pink house with all this new cladding as well. So it's a good chance for us to see to do part of the house and also see the sort of process that we're going to need to do in future years to replace the rest of the cladding as well. It was a busy week, and that wasn't all we did. So we also replaced the balcony down at North Haven. So the researchers' balcony had got rotten. You could start to put your foot through the top boards. And when we ripped off the top boards, we realised that a lot of it underneath was quite rotten as well. So we ripped up all of that, replaced anything that needed replacing, and then put the boards back on. And it looks really, really good, really strong, and should be sound for a good few years to come now as well. Also on the right hand side here you can see this is the roof of the battery, what we call the battery room at the farm. It's also the first aid room. This is a roof that's needed replacing for a long time, so this is what I would call a one-day job. One, because it doesn't take that long to do, but also because you don't want to leave the roof off the building overnight. It's one of those jobs that you start in really lovely weather. It was blue skies, it wasn't that windy, it was relatively warm for March, but as the day went on, it progressively got worse and worse and worse, and we came back after lunch and it was pretty biblical actually. The wind had picked up quite a lot, there was rain coming through, and it was really, really unpleasant. It's one of those days that I'm going to remember for quite a long time, I'd have thought. But really good to get it done, and it was still finished in one day. It's always one of those things that takes a bit longer than you imagine as well. So other things that we do as well. So a few of you might remember the sort of pretty crazy weather we had this spring, really. So we got back onto Skomer in early March, and February had been really dry, so the island was like cracked and parched. And then pretty much from the day we arrived to the end of March, it rained pretty much every day. It was quite a tough month, and the paths ended up looking like this. This is after just a few days of being open to the public in early April. The paths are really muddy, really boggy, and people are starting to avoid the worst bits as well, which is, I guess, a natural instinct to do. But when you've got an island covered in burrows, you can't have people walking off the paths, and you don't want to damage all the vegetation as well. So when people wonder about what we do on the Mondays when we're closed, for example, this is an example of what we did on a Monday. We went down and we put in a temporary boardwalk just to try and focus people's efforts, and it worked really, really well. It was an instant fix almost. It was really wonderful. A lot of work that went into it, but it was a great outcome and a great result as well. But eventually spring does come, and when it comes, it's really beautiful. So you get a massive display of bluebells on Skomer. And you get scenes like this, really, with the blue sky, the bluebells, and the blue sea as well. It's pretty spectacular. It's pretty stunning, and it's one of my favourite views, and I'm sure lots of visitors coming to Skomer is one of their favourite views as well. For me, it's not just the view; it's also the smell as well. It smells absolutely incredible, and I love just spending time up on the north side of the island when all the bluebells are in full flower. But actually, the bluebells are often beaten by some of the migrants that come as well. So wheatears, for example, they come they first start arriving in March, before the bluebells are in their full bloom, and it's our first sign of spring, I guess. So it's always really lovely to see the northern wheatears arriving, and we're always keeping an eye out on the coasts for the first arrival. So in April, for example, our peak days can be something along the lines of about 70-80 individuals, and that's always pretty exciting when there's wheatears just bouncing around all the walls, singing from the rocky outcrops. That's always really lovely. Also, as the months go on, we get Greenland wheatears passing through as well, and other migrants as well. So you've got a pied flycatcher here. So pied flycatchers, we get a few records every spring, but it's very rare for us to have a male in spring or even in autumn as well. So to have a male in mid-April was really, really special and really lovely. They're just wonderful birds, watching it just feeding around the back of the farm was really special. Also in spring we had a hoopoo, so one of a couple of records from the year actually. So we had a bird in mid-April, just east of the farm, and then we had a bird on the 6th and 7th of September, and also on the 15th of September. So it's kind of difficult to know whether the September birds are the same bird or not, really wonderful. And then as we get later into the year, we start getting into sort of late April into May, the birding can get a bit more exciting. There's a better chance of sort of some more scarcities and rarities coming through. But also it gets busier for us. So the seabird work starts to ramp up. And we're quite lucky that we have two volunteers called Mike and Ted Wallen who come over and they do our gull counts for us. So they count all of the lesser blackback gulls, all of the colonies from all of the vantage points around the island, and they give us what they call an eye count of those. So they've been doing it for years. They're fantastic volunteers. They also happen to be very good bird watchers, and they always turn up something good on the island as well. This year was no exception. So on the 13th of May, they had 17 glossy ibises flying along the coast of Skomer. Pretty remarkable, really. It's only the second record we've got for Skomer. The first record was just a couple of years ago with a single bird in autumn, but this is just a remarkable number of birds, really, yeah, pretty special. And it was also, I think, on the same morning they had a nightingale singing down in North Valley as well, which is the first record since 2016 or something. So yeah, really cool birds, and yeah, sort of Skomer really was on fire that day. Also through the spring, so through April and into May, we get things like ring ouzels passing through, and it is a really exceptional spring for ring ouzels, actually. We peaked at 15 birds in one day on the 18th, and it was pretty remarkable. There was a flock of 10 birds at the farm, for example. So I've never seen that many ring ouzels before, and it was a really cool spring. Also, things like collared doves, so birds that you see really regularly on the mainland. They had a really good year on Skomer as well, so birds that you wouldn't even bat an eyelid at, they're always quite noticeable on Skomer. And then before you know it, we're into the seabird season. So it's kind of a mixed year for seabirds, really. Impacts of bird flu and marine, and possibly this marine heat wave as well, sort of all intertwined. So we'll go through the seabirds almost one by one. But yeah, a bit of a mixed year, sort of some ups and some downs. But actually, the first birds that we count, the puffins, we actually count these in March, late March, early April. Sometimes getting a little bit early, to be honest with you. And it's really good news for puffins, actually. So this graph shows the increase of puffins over the last 20 odd years, and it's quite remarkable. They hit 42,500 individuals this year, which, as you can imagine, is a lot of puffins. It's a lot of counting, actually. So when it happens in late March, there's only a few of us on the island. So there's not many of us that are able to come out and count all these birds in one evening. So yeah, really good news for the puffins, and hopefully that increase will continue into the future as well. On to razorbills, some of the smartest residents we have on the island. A bit more of a sort of negative look out for razorbills. They didn't drop by much, but the population did drop after having increased quite rapidly last year. So a slight drop there. So we'll see what happens in the future. So just over 10,000 individuals at the moment. Guillemots, their outlook was a bit more bleak, really. So the graph shows here they had about 10% drop compared to the previous year, which is obviously quite a large drop. And I'm sure most of you will be aware of the pretty well documented wrecks on the beaches in the autumn. So these guillemots that were washing up dead on the beaches, many of them testing positive for bird flu. And so we could be in for a pretty tough year in the next few years. The impacts of this bird flu probably won't be fully seen until the next few years at least. So it'll be really interesting to see what the returning numbers are like this year on Skomer. But yeah, hopefully it's not as bad as we fear, but certainly a tough year for them. Great blackback gulls, they're kind of almost plateaued off now, around about 120 pairs, something on those lines. They've had some peaks and troughs in the last sort of 10 years, but nothing too extraordinary. They had increased 2023 on 2022, so a slight increase there. The kittiwakes, They are they're one of my favourite birds. They just make me smile every time I see them. Unfortunately, they are also struggling as well. One of the lowest levels on record, so they're down well under 1,500 pairs now, and they look to be struggling. As you can see, there's quite a lot of fluctuation between years, but yeah, the general trend looks to be downward at the moment, but hopefully they can bounce back a bit as well. Less blackback gulls, they've unfortunately as well continued to decline, and their colonies are also shrinking as well. Fulmars, we're on about 407, well, exactly 472 pairs of them on the island, apparently occupied sites, which is 66 fewer than 2022. So that's a massive drop in the population, and actually had very low productivity this year as well. So they might really struggle in the future. Herring gulls actually did a bit better this year. Their population is slightly increased, and the productivity was very good as well. So that's encouraging for the future. So on to the sort of more terrestrial birds. So chough that breed on the island. In terms of breeding numbers, it's really good news. So 7 pairs, the most pairs that have ever bred on Skomer. A really high density for such a small site. And this pair that were prospecting last year did eventually go on to breed this year as well in a new site. So that's really exciting. In terms of their productivity, it wasn't great. It seems like the pairs that fledged early fledged good numbers, but the pairs that fledged late almost all failed. So this is probably to do with the weather, the sort of extremes of weather that we had this summer, the really lovely dry period, and then the really stormy sort of July, August as well. So yeah, a sort of mixed picture for chough as well, but really good numbers with breeding. There were 3 pairs of short-eared owls this year, so breeding down in North Valley and South Valley. It's nice to see a sort of slight recovery compared to just the 1 pair that bred last year as well. And ravens, we had 4 pairs of ravens this year. On to oyster catchers then. So again, a very noisy residence on the island, but a slight drop in the population as well, so down to about 59 pairs after around about 73, I think it was last year. So yeah, a bit of a fluctuation in the population there, but hopefully that's not a downward trajectory. Onto the ducks then. So 3 pairs of shoveler, a pair of mallard, and 2 pairs of shelduck as well. But actually, they're not the most exciting ducks this year. The most exciting ducks are gadwall. So there were 3 on North Pond on the 25th of April, and they were the first to be seen on Skomer since 2014. So 9 years previous to this was the last record. And actually, 2 of them stayed on Skomer throughout May, and they actually attempted to breed. So this is the first breeding record since 2012. We didn't see any chicks, but yeah, it's still quite a remarkable record since a sort of sporadic breeding since 2012. Okay, and on to curlew then. So yeah, they're really wonderful birds, of course, really important throughout Britain, and Skomer is really important in terms of Pembrokeshire context. It's being the last breeding curlew in the whole of Pembrokeshire. So we're really lucky to have 3 pairs of them on the island. As you can see here in the centre of the photo, we did have chicks this year as well. So you got the chick followed by the adult just behind there as well. This pair actually nested really close to the path, just east of the farm, and that was really wonderful visitors to see the breeding curlew. We had a lot of engagement, a lot of photos, a lot of questions around the breeding curlew on the island as well, which is just really lovely at the end of the day to sort of speak to some of these visitors and experience, understand their experiences with the curlew, rather than the sort of usual questions of all the seabirds, which are of course important, but it's nice to have a little bit of a change there as well. Okay, and staying on the curlew theme, this is actually a colour-ringed curlew that turned up on Skomer in the autumn this year. So it's got a little flag on its leg with the code LC, and this is the first curlew from the 2023 release of head-started curlews from Norfolk. So it was released at Sandringham on the 17th of August and seen on Skomer for a couple of months this autumn as well. So that's really exciting, and it's the first curlew that's been seen away from the wash as well. So they're really excited about this, the people that released the curlew, and obviously we are as well. So maybe one day it'll become part of the Skomer curlew population. So other breeding birds then, just a quick little run through really. So there's just there were 4 pairs of stone chats breeding out on the island this year. Again, these noisy but wonderful birds. And blackbirds, there were 9 pairs of blackbirds on the island. And then again, before you know it, you're into autumn, and the island months are flying by. The highlights of the autumn, often for me, are seeing some of the birds that you just take for granted on the mainland out on the island. So long-tailed tits, for example, they're not an annual visitor to Skomer. We don't see them every year, but when we see them, they're absolutely fantastic. And it was a really, really good year for them this year. There were multiple flocks roaming around the island, through the dead bracken, flying over the havens, and going through coastal gullies and all that side of things. It's a pretty surreal experience when you're birding out on the cliffs and there's a long-tailed tit just darting around, not too far away from where some of the seabirds usually nest as well. So yeah, pretty fun in the autumn. So we've got things like blue tits on the left here, and house sparrows again adding to the excitement of birds. But then you get back to a bit more of the sort of usual resident wintering species out in Skomer. So things like hen harriers. It's a really fantastic place for hen harriers in the autumn and the winter. So up to 4 individual ringtails this autumn, and an adult male as well. So really, really wonderful to see. Red kites are increasingly common throughout the season now. As soon as we get a nice bit of settled, calm weather, you can guarantee there'll be red kites out and around the island as well. Robins are a numerous wintering bird on Skomer, and you can see the sort of cumulative graphs here. So September this year we had about 500 birds cumulative for the whole month. The record is crazy. It's like 1,400 in 2000. That's a lot of birds in 1 month. But yeah, just thought I'd quickly add that in for a bit of interest really. And then coot, so another bird which are probably just about annual on Skomer, but they're always a bit of a treat when you see them. And multiple birds on North Pond this year were certainly a bit unusual. And then we're talking about little owls. So these birds that are previous breeders haven't been seen on Skomer since 2018 when they last attempted to breed. And then this year just reappeared in the middle of summer. So June, I think I was walking around the back of the farm, and this flew off the back of the wall and down into the valley, and I was just walking around going, pretty sure that was a little owl. And then you get round the back and it's just sat there on the wall looking at you. Really unexpected thing to see in the middle of the summer really. But it stayed for a couple of months. It stayed right through the autumn. Took up residence on Endwall Ridge, just down near Skomer Head, and then disappeared sort of September, October time. So we'll wait and see if that comes back and attempts to breed in the future as well. And then on to sort of some of the sort of more scarcities of the autumn, I guess. It was a really exceptional year for wryneck. It actually started with the spring record, which is pretty unusual for Skomer. So we had a bird in April, pretty unusual. But the autumn was just phenomenal. In September, on the 9th of September, we had 6 wrynecks. We had 4 at the farm and 2 down in North Valley. Absolutely remarkable numbers of wryneck. You basically went wherever you went on the island, you could see a wryneck for that sort of 11-day period in the middle of September. So that was really cool. And then some other records from the autumn really. So cat legret was the second island record that was seen on the 7th of August. Rose finch on the 14th of September. That's the first since 2017. And in October we had a nightjar as well, so a bit of a late record, but it didn't have a tail, so maybe that explains why it's making such slow progress south. But yeah, pretty crazy to see that flying through the bracken in the middle of the day, getting chased by meadow pipits. And then a bit of a reminder really, so if you're interested in some of the migrants and some of the breeding birds on Skomer, we do have our bird reports online. So 2021, 22 are online at the moment, and also 2023 will be online fairly soon as well. So yeah, that should be on by the end of the month, and our annual report is up there as well. So the annual report goes in a bit more detail around the sort of, well, basically everything that happens on the island, volunteering, the media side of things, all of the sort of practical work, all the management work and that side of things. So if you're interested in that, then read the annual report. It's a bit dry, but it might be of interest to you. And then the bird report has got the sort of pretty pictures and information on birds as well. So then other things that sort of happened through the autumn. So Jinx, the conservation detection dog, and handler Greg came out to the island. So they check around the buildings to make sure there's been no incursions of any rats on the island. It's like another line of defence for us. So it's really good to have Jinx out there again. And Jinx also goes out and checks the barges before they leave Nayland. So that we can be sure that all the delivery of materials that we're getting onto Skomer haven't got any rats in them as well. We also fitted the garage doors, which you saw a photo of right at the start underneath the mattresses on the dumper there. So these are now in place and they look absolutely wonderful. They're built by some volunteers and they did a really fantastic job. And our garage doors are no longer held together by various random screws, staples, nails, bits of wood, bits of plastic, various different bits of metal, some brackets, all sorts. So they're looking really, really good now. We also had a work party in the autumn as well. So the autumn work party, their main task was to build a compost toilet at North Haven. So sort of increased drought resistance or drought resilience in the future. We're having increasingly dry autumns, and North Haven in particular really suffers with that. So we're putting a compost toilet and a urinal there just to try and reduce the amount of water that we're using in the buildings. We also built a woodshed as well, just to house all of that sort of timber that we're getting on and for construction in the future. So it's got some airflow between it and keeps the wood nice and secure for the coming year. And then just touching on the sort of tasks of the future work parties and big jobs coming up really. So this is the cladding at North Haven. This is the battening behind the cladding. It's all just rotten, so that needs to come off and get replaced along with the cladding. And you can see the windowsills drooping there as well. We've got a project in place for this year to replace all those windows, so that's really good news. And then the balcony around the front of North Haven as well. So this is my balcony on my side rather than the researcher's side, and as you can see, it's starting to grow grass, which I don't think it's meant to. So we'll get around to doing that this year hopefully as well. And that's pretty much everything from me really. Just a lovely sunrise one morning over South Haven, and then a bit of a dewy morning looking down into to South Haven as well. So thank you very much for listening, and hopefully I will see some of you out on Skomer this year. Thanks a lot.